When Japan entered World War II in 1941, its empire stretched from China to the Pacific. Tens of thousands of Allied soldiers fell into Japanese hands, but unlike German camps, Japan's POW prisons were built in secrecy. Few photos, fewer survivors, and almost no records survived. From Manchuria to Burma, hundreds of camps operated under brutal conditions. Many were disguised as labor compounds to avoid war crime scrutiny. Each camp was a world of silence, fenced by bamboo and fear. Prisoners called them hells on earth. Disease, starvation, and beatings were daily realities. Japan never signed the Geneva Convention, leaving POWs unprotected, and so began one of the darkest chapters of the Pacific War. Camps where the sun rose red and mercy never dawned, where the empire's secret prisons swallowed hope whole. In February 1942, the British fortress of Singapore fell in just 1 week. Over 80,000 Allied troops surrendered, the largest capitulation in British history. The Japanese were unprepared for so many prisoners, yet saw opportunity. They saw them not as soldiers, but as laborers to fuel the empire. Thousands were shipped north by train and sea. Packed in cattle cars, men suffocated in their own sweat and waste. Before even reaching the camps, Japanese guards viewed surrender as dishonor and treated prisoners accordingly. Food was scarce. A few handfuls of rice a day. Medical care was non-existent. Malaria rampant. Corporal punishment was constant and arbitrary. Survival became a contest of willpower and luck. One soldier later wrote, "We weren't living. We were merely not dead. These men would help build the infamous death." Railway and Singapore's fall became the empire's cruel victory. Stretching for 115 kilometers from Thailand to Burma, the Death Railway became legend. It was meant to connect the empire's territories for troop movement, but it cost over 100,000 lives. POWs and Asian forced laborers alike. Men hacked through jungle with hand tools under monsoon rains. They slept in bamboo huts, crawling with lice. Fed only rice and salt water. Those who collapsed were beaten or left for dead. Bodies were buried along the tracks in shallow graves. Be quick or die was the only rule. Every bridge and tunnel was built on human suffering. Cholera outbreaks killed thousands within days. The smell of decay became the scent of the railway itself. Survivors remembered Japanese guards chanting "work faster" through whips. By 1943, the line was finished, but few workers lived to see it. The jungle still hides their bones beneath the rails today. Inside the bamboo fences, every hour was survival. Prisoners rose at dawn, lined up for inspection, and were counted endlessly. Anyone missing was beaten. Sometimes everyone was. Breakfast was a handful of rice and tea made from boiled grass. Work began before sunrise and lasted until dark. Men carried logs, built airfields, and dug ditches for the Japanese army. Shoes, soap, and medicine were luxuries no one saw again. Diseases like beriberi, dysentery, and malaria tore through the ranks. Doctors improvised scalpels from sharpened spoons. Some men went blind from malnutrition. Letters from home were censored or destroyed. Guards often punished prisoners for smiling, calling it insolence. Hope survived in whispers, in memories of home, in stolen moments of prayer. But each day chipped away another piece of humanity. Not only men suffered, nurses, missionaries, and civilians were also imprisoned. In camps like Sumatra's Palembang and the Philippines' Santo Tomas, women endured horror. Japanese commanders viewed them as propaganda trophies and laborers. They lived behind fences, often separated from their children. Food rations were half those of men's camps. They built their own hospitals using scraps and tin cans. Diseases swept through dormitories where hundreds were packed together. Many died quietly, their graves unmarked, but their resilience became legendary. Women smuggled medicines, taught children, and sang hymns to keep hope alive. After liberation, survivors said, "We refused to hate. That was our victory." Their diaries, later found, told of courage in slow starvation, forgotten for decades. Their voices now echo through archives. They proved that even in cages, dignity could not be crushed. North and occupied Manchuria, Another type of camp operated in shadows. Unit 731, Japan's Biological Warfare Division, performed grotesque experiments. Prisoners were dissected alive to study frostbite, disease, and weapon effects. Vivisection without anesthesia was routine. Thousands of Chinese civilians and POWs perished in these laboratories. The goal was to create plague bombs and biological weapons for battlefield use. Captured Americans and Soviets were among the victims. Scientists infected them with anthrax, cholera, and bubonic plague. They charted deaths like medical statistics. No one survived. After the war, the U.S. secretly granted immunity to some doctors. For their data, their crimes remained hidden for decades. These were not ordinary camps. They were factories of death and denial, the darkest secret of Japan's wartime empire. Far from the tropics, other POWs toiled in Japan itself, in the freezing north of Hokkaido. Prisoners mined coal for Japanese factories. Temperatures dropped below 20 C. Clothing was rags. Men worked 16-hour shifts deep underground cave-ins, and explosions killed hundreds. Corpses were often buried within the mine tunnels themselves when Allied bombers neared. POWs were sealed inside for days. Survivors described it as hell frozen over. They shoveled coal for the Empire's warships that bombed their own nations. Yet even there, small kindnesses existed, a guard slipping extra rice. Such moments became legends among survivors after the war. Those mines were dynamited and erased from maps. Only scattered bones and rusted helmets remain. Today, the North still whispers their names in the wind. Transporting POWs became another death sentence. The so-called hellships carried men from occupied islands to Japan. They were unmarked, so Allied submarines often attacked them unknowingly. Prisoners suffocated in the dark holds, 1,000 men in spaces for 200. Heat, thirst, and disease turned ships into floating tombs. When torpedoes hit, few escaped the locked holds. One ship, the Arisen Maru, sank with 1,800 American POWs. None survived. Survivors of other ships spoke of madness, men drinking seawater to stay alive. Japanese guards often refused to open hatches even during air raids. Bodies were thrown overboard at dawn. Sailors could smell death before they reached port. These were not transports, they were executions by sea. Historians still call them the lost convoys of despair, a cruel voyage between captivity and oblivion. Despite starvation and brutality, prisoners resisted in quiet ways. They built hidden radios from wire and tin to hear Allied news. They sabotaged equipment, slowed work, and smuggled medicine. In one camp, prisoners forged fake medical charts to protect the sick from labor. Others risked beatings to hide fellow soldiers from execution. Faith, friendship, and humor became acts of defiance. They whispered jokes about their captors, shared songs from home. Some drew secret maps, hoping to escape or report later. One sketch survived, drawn on a scrap of rice sack, now in a museum. It showed the layout of an entire Japanese camp. These tiny rebellions kept their humanity alive. As one survivor said, to smile was to fight. Even when freedom was a fading dream, they refused to surrender their spirit. By 1945, Allied forces were closing in from all sides. As Japan's empire crumbled, guards grew desperate and violent. Executions increased, food vanished, and camps became chaos. Some prisoners were killed days before liberation. American paratroopers stormed certain camps to save survivors. They found living skeletons who couldn't even stand to salute. In some places, Japanese commanders committed suicide before capture. In others, survivors took brutal revenge on their tormentors. War crimes trials followed, revealing horrific testimonies. Thousands of Japanese officers were tried, though many escaped justice. General Hama, who oversaw Bataan, was executed for atrocities, but Unit 731's leaders were quietly shielded by post-war politics. Justice came unevenly, as it often does, and many survivors never spoke again. When the war ended, over 130,000 Allied POWs had passed through Japanese camps. At least 35,000 never returned. Those who did carried invisible wounds. Back home, Few believed their stories at first. The sheer horror sounded unreal to civilians. Governments focused on rebuilding, not remembering. For decades, these men stayed silent, haunted by flashbacks and guilt. Nightmares of beatings, starvation, and bamboo cages followed them. Some turned to alcohol, others to activism. Their diaries became crucial historical evidence. Only in the 1980s did Japan begin formally acknowledging their suffering. Apologies were limited and controversial, but for survivors, memory itself was the truest form of justice. They had outlived the empire that tried to erase them. Across Asia, remnants of Japan's POW camps remain buried in jungle. Rusting helmets, spoons, and name tags peek through the earth. Local villagers still stumble upon bones while farming. Each discovery tells a story never properly closed. Some graves were mass pits dug by the dying themselves, others marked only with bamboo crosses long rotted away. Archaeologists now map these sites with drones and sonar. They uncover rusted medical kits, diaries, and bullets. Every item becomes a whisper from the past. The tropical earth preserved much, but forgot the names. Memorials rise quietly on remote hillsides, each one a fragment of a vast, hidden cemetery. The war ended 8 decades ago, but the jungle still remembers. Post-war Japan struggled with how to remember its own atrocities. For years, school books downplayed the POW camp's brutality. Many veterans refused to speak, haunted or ashamed, but survivors' testimonies slowly broke through the silence. Museums in Japan now display camp artifacts once denied to exist. Younger generations began asking questions their elders avoided. War memory became a national mirror, uncomfortable but necessary. Japan's peace constitution emerged as a rejection of that imperial cruelty. Still, debates continue over apologies and accountability. Some right-wing groups deny or minimize what happened. Yet truth, once buried, cannot be erased again. Each rediscovered story becomes a moral lesson. History does not fade. It demands to be faced, and so the reckoning continues. Today, fewer than a few hundred survivors remain alive. They record testimonies, preserving memory against time's decay. Their voices tremble but do not falter. They speak for friends who never came home. Modern historians compile their words into digital archives, films, documentaries, and memorial books spread their stories worldwide. Some Japanese citizens attend these memorials in quiet apology. The survivors say forgiveness is possible, but forgetting is not. One veteran said, "Hatred is another kind of prison." Their resilience became their final act of defiance. They turned pain into remembrance, loss into legacy. Every story told becomes one more light in the darkness. The last camp still stands, not of bamboo, but of memory, and within it, humanity endures. The final surviving camp, Fukuoka No. 14, now stands as a museum. Visitors walk where prisoners once toiled, now in silence. Rusting tools and barbed wire remain beneath glass cases. Local children lay flowers beside faded photos. Each corner hums with stories too painful to forget. The air feels heavy, as if the past still breathes there. It is no longer a place of punishment, but of reflection. The ghosts of the fallen are not angry, they are remembered. The empire that built these prisons is long gone, but their lessons still shape the conscience of nations. War can destroy bodies, but memory rebuilds souls, and every visitor who leaves that place carries part of its truth. Because the last camp never truly closed, it lives on wherever we choose to remember.